It did not begin with a bang, but with a whisper, a secret language spoken in the spaces between heartbeats. When they first met, it wasn't a collision of people, but of entire worlds. He saw in her a wildfire contained in human form, a goddess walking through a mortal realm, and he built a temple in his heart to worship her. She saw in him a sanctuary, a quiet strength that could anchor her storm, a man who looked at her not for what she could offer, but for everything she was. Their love was a mythology they wrote together, each touch a verse, each glance a chapter. They were architects of a shared universe, built on the foundations of whispered promises and the unwavering belief that they were the exception to every rule. In the beginning, their fire was a hearth, a source of impossible warmth that held the cold world at bay. They were invincible, two halves of a single, blazing soul, convinced their light could never be extinguished. They believed their story was a legend in the making, a testament to a love so profound it could rewrite the stars themselves. But even sanctuaries can become prisons when the walls close in, and gods, when left too long on their pedestals, can be toppled by the very hands that built them. The whispers that once built their world began to carry a different tune. The slow poison began its work, not with malice, but with neglect. It was insidious, a quiet corruption that started in the unnoticed corners of their devotion. It was a forgotten promise here, a sharp-edged truth there, a silence that stretched just a second too long. Each instance was a single, almost invisible drop of venom in the shared well from which they both drank. They didn't notice it at first. How could they? They were still drunk on the myth of their own making, but the poison was patient. It worked its way into the foundations, turning trust to suspicion and understanding to expectation. The quiet moments that once felt like peace began to feel like emptiness. The space between them, once filled with an electric hum, became a vacuum, pulling them apart atom by atom. The temple he built for her started to feel like a cage, its gilded bars made of his expectations. The worship she once craved became a weight, a constant performance she could no longer sustain. And the sanctuary he found in her became a storm he could no longer navigate, its winds threatening to tear him apart. The fire was no longer a hearth, it was a forge, and the heat was becoming unbearable. They began to wound each other in the dark, with words disguised as concerns and truths sharpened into weapons. Every unspoken resentment became a ghost haunting the hallways of their home. Every buried frustration became a landmine waiting for a careless step. They were no longer partners, but opponents in a silent, undeclared war, each vying for the last pocket of breathable air in a room filling with smoke. They stood on opposite sides of a chasm they had carved themselves, forgetting that they had once stood on the same ground, hand in hand. The pressure built in the silence between them, a dam of resentment holding back a flood of fury, and they both knew in the deepest parts of their weary souls that it was only a matter of time before it broke. And then it did. The slow poison became an explosion. It wasn't one thing, it was everything. Every wound they had ignored, every word they had swallowed, every flame they thought they could contain, it all ignited in a single blinding flash of terrible clarity. The dam didn't just break, it vaporized. Years of carefully constructed silence shattered into a million razor-sharp accusations. The ghosts in the hallways began to scream. The landmines all detonated at once. Love, which had been their fortress, became the funeral pyre where they burned their shared history. Every beautiful memory was offered up as kindling, every tender moment twisted into a weapon. Worship, which had been his prayer, became her curse. The pedestal he had placed her on became the cliff from which she was thrown, and the adoration in his eyes curdled into a bitter, scalding resentment. They tore down the mythology of their own making, ripping out the pages until nothing was left but the ugly, brutal truth of their ending. And the fire that once bound them, the sacred flame they had sworn to protect, it turned on its keepers. It was no longer a light to guide them, but a conflagration that consumed them. It didn't just warm them, it melted them down to their very essence, leaving nothing but scorched earth and the hollow echo of what they used to be. It burned them both alive. In the suffocating silence that followed the inferno, there was only the taste of smoke and the cold, stark reality of ruin. The war was over, but there were no victors. Only two survivors standing in the wreckage of a world they had built and destroyed with their own hands. They were strangers now, haunted by the ghost of a shared language they could no longer speak. The legend was over. The myth was dead. All that remained were the ashes, and the chilling knowledge that some fires are not meant to be contained. They are meant to burn everything to the ground.